everybody, I'm Mango Thunderslice, and today's video is VAX. Debunking Vaccinology, the epitome of pseudoscience. The subtitle, Distrust the Authority, or Unsafe and Ineffective. We'll see, I'll decide on that later on after the video's done. But point is, basically, this has kind of become one of the sort of thematic elements of the channel, right? It's basically the whole reason that we created this channel to begin with was because there is a lot of illusion that this world is running on. A lot of things that aren't actually connected to reality, that are just conventions that apply insofar as people need them to apply, which generally is not very far. As long as it will work on the idiot to your left and the idiot to your right, then it must be true, right? Because, you know, if a gaggle of fools can't disprove it, then it must be unequivocal truth. This is essentially the basis on which the entire scientific edifice and academic prestige rests. It is entirely on this perception of expertise and authority where none actually exists. And to the extent that they actually do understand anything about how this world works or the truth, they often engage in deception and in the same self-seeking, self-gratifying behaviors as the rest of humanity. And yet they hold up scientists in this cult of atheism. And basically, scientists are like the greatest people in the world by, mixing things around in test tubes and reading data from machines. And I am not here to denigrate science in its true form. Absolutely not. And absolutely, I would lionize those who are the true scientists of our history, right? Of Maxwell and, Tesla and Heaviside and Steinmetz and all these basically men who came and figured out the nature of reality at least a little bit. And they passed that on forward to us by communicating it to their peers and by engineering new concepts based off of this perception of truth and reality. And again, the kind of theme of this year has really been showing that no matter what the conditions, especially in a year as chaotic as 2020, that you are always in command of your sphere if you choose to be. The car will only crash when I let go of the wheel, right? As long as I'm holding on to it and I'm awake and I'm paying attention, this car will go where I tell it to go. It's a very simple fact. And there might be, right now the road is mostly clear, but up ahead there might be a car crash. There might be some massive conflict that I simply can't perceive. But even when I come to that point, if and when I come to that point, I will still be able to drive around, the obstacles. I will be able to get off the freeway. I'll be able to even get out of the car and take a different means of transportation. Think of your entire life almost like a James Bond being chased by all these bad guys jumping off of cranes and all this crazy chasing over all these incongruent circumstances. And yet the congruence is your own identity, your own life, your own point of perspective, right? Your own shard of the divine mirror, which is to say that we are all essentially part of this field together. The great human being is a part of God, right? It is an organ of God, just as we are cells within that organ. And a cell that does not believe in the greater being, that does not act in the service of the greater being, and consequently in the nature of their own true peers and fellow brethren and comrades, if you will, in a sort of mutual endeavor, it is basically, that's a cancer cell, right? That's disease tissue. That's dead flesh. That's basically, inside the body. That is why people die. That is basically because the body starts to corrode. The people who live routinely into centenarians, basically above 100 years old, they live in houses made of organic structures that are orgone conductive. They don't live under metal roofs. Nobody lives to 100 years living under a metal roof. Promise. Right? Nobody lives to 100 living in an apartment building with 100 different Wi-Fi routers all going at the same time, creating an interference pattern that to your cells is like a bullhorn set to max on each ear all day long, right? With Barney's playing in the background like Guantanamo style, right? That is what you're doing to your cells. Your ears may not be able to hear it, but your cells can. And that's why everyone is miserable. That's why nobody can sleep. That's why everybody's on drugs. That's why everybody needs video games and media and all these illusions, right? The buffet of illusions, the smorgasbord of lies. And that is basically the function that it serves, because people cut away from truth they require illusions. It is the sustenance, the saccharin, right, that they are persisting on, not really thriving, not really fulfilling their destiny, not evolving into that greater man in alignment with God. That is, basically all put on hold, or in most cases actually rolled back and reversed. You start to revert into an animal state. And this is also, again, what trauma does to us, both physical and psychological trauma in a macro sense, but also, again, there is such a thing as cellular trauma. There is such a thing as biological trauma. When you inject poison into a young infant, that will condition their immune response and their cellular structure for their entire life, right? And right now they're doing the same thing with COVID. They're using the same completely bullshit modality. I think that actually ICANN, which is a vaccine truth advocacy organization, they basically got one of the companies, I forget which one it was, to actually use a placebo, like an actual saline placebo against the vaccine versus just using basically like a blank vaccine. But with normally what they'll do is they'll test the vaccine against essentially like a blank vaccine that doesn't have the pathogen, but it still has the aluminum hydroxide. It still has all the other basically disgusting and completely artificial ingredients that should not be injected into the body in any quantity. They say, oh, it's not very much, right? Okay, here, let me smear some of my shit on your salad. It's only a little bit, right? Here, go ahead and take a bite. Like, the logic that these people use in basically browbeating and attacking people who question the authority of this scientific edifice, of this priestcraft in white robes, and in the service of their children to protect them, and they get beaten psychologically. They get whipped and chained in terms of psychic intellectual force, and these people are midwits. They're absolute midgets on psychological stature, and they purport to be like the grandest and greatest minds in the world, right? Their avatar is Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? An insufferable little twat who thinks he understands everything about the universe and won't even listen to a single other person talk. Like Joe Rogan, as they blather on and on and on about basically their own, just basically communist, atheist, technocrat worldview. And it will keep on persisting as long as people believe in it. And people basically, they give up their own power and true identity, and they start worshiping this cabal. Again, the meta-cult is the last thing that they have left going for them. They still have, of course, basically the entire deep state, but the fact, again, that secrecy was their greatest ally for so long. The fact that now millions and maybe even billions at this point are looking at these structures which attempted to remain hidden, right? It's a very different psychic, metaphysical outlook. That terrain looks a lot different, right? There's a lot of people waking up, and, it's, again, the reason that I make videos is to leave that trail of breadcrumbs and, show essentially, for myself as well. I mean, it kind of serves also just as kind of an archives of my own psychology and development. And, I think that, again, in the absence of continuity of one's own narrative, you can easily default to media archetypes, these artificial programs, and start living your life by the subconscious illusion that is presented to you by the media. And this includes movies and television and video games and music and all the things that are not of this natural world. It's not to say that they don't have a purpose. It's not to say that they're everywhere and always evil. It's just to say that if you let your subconscious mind be hijacked by artificial stimuli, you are doing yourself a great disservice, and you are running a great risk of acting in the service of people who you would otherwise normally oppose and resist, and righteously so. And so that is essentially, again, what people need to do when they recognize that, peace on earth begins with birth. Home births of taking the violence out of the birth equation. Don't poison the mother with vaccines. Don't tell her to take aspartame and sucralose instead of eating fruit, right? Don't tell her to basically eat all these poisonous artificial things and avoid basically the things that are actually nutritious. And we're moving more in that direction as a people, just regardless of the meta-cult and the cartel. It is basically it is something that is popular and social. When people are fundamentally unhealthy on a mass scale, and people start asking questions and solving problems on their own, right? The more initiated and the more those with more initiative, start awakening and activating the rest, right? And for me, my awakening was in 2006, and it's interesting to meet people who are just awakening within the last few years, and they're very much black-pilled in a certain sense, as it were, very demoralized from realizing the forces that are arrayed against them and having their kind of worldview, their prior worldview kind of deconstructed. But that's the dark night of the soul. On the other side of that bridge, that chasm, is the world of light, the world of true meaning and of true perception. And yes, there's chaos in that world too, but there's also order, and it is a world of freedom and knowledge, and not a world of darkness and slavery. And so, it's not to say that everyone's always on the same page. We just definitely have different perspectives within that realm, but everybody agrees on a common objective morality, and that is the difference between the world of the gods and the world of men. And we can ascend into a higher realm. In certain places, this is the nature of fractal universe. Wherever you are, if you are on that vibration, you are literally raising up that place in which you inhabit. And then, but it's literally in the matter, right? And this is kind of where Organite comes in, of basically having these tokens of psychic force that essentially serve as etheric conductors, and almost like a repeater network for a certain vibration. And it is a real phenomenon. There's a reason that humans have believed in magical thinking for their entire duration. It is because at a certain level, yes, there is an etheric realm. There are ways to influence things at a distance. Gravity itself, unexplained by the relativists beyond, it's because mass and bending of space-time. It's a completely asinine worldview, and we are supposed to treat them as our new gods and our new priests and lords. It is such an absurd proposition, and these, again, are the vaccine cultists. Every single time, unequivocally, they all come from the same psychological and psychic force and origin. It is this darkness and this trust in authority, this disbelief in a cosmic spirit, as in God, of that, of consciousness in matter, but just see humans as essentially meat sacks and just glorified monkeys and just here to rape and pillage and burn and reave. It is an animalistic state of mind, again, the orc state of mind in the Tolkien-esque worldview. And again, Tolkien was describing a metaphysical situation and a resolution that, ostensibly took place long in the past, but also in its psychic form is repeating here in the present. And that same conflict is playing out in almost perfect form. And it really comes down to, do the men of Middle-earth start to actually reclaim their own dominion and stop letting it be exported to essentially a foreign power that does not have their best interest in mind? And that is basically, the name of the game. And even, again, regardless of the outcome of this election challenge, we are on our own. We've always been on our own. I've never preached anything otherwise. I just also appreciate having air support wherever possible. And that's what, the political action comes down to, is having air support for our ground operations. But it's never going to eliminate our ground operations, basically whether or not we have that. We're still going to act. We're just going to change our trajectory. We're going to drive that car according to the obstacles. And so, one of that right now, one of the obstacles right now on the path to raising, healthy children in this new imperial world of the 21st century is basically escaping the vaccine regime. And in many states, including California, you basically have to homeschool. You have to drop out of the public school system and really stop relying on the imperial structures altogether. I've kind of come to a different understanding with regard to debt and banking. I think, given the trajectory of the entire system, it is important to use credit and debt wisely, but to always understand that, basically that ship, it will crash. It is the Titanic. but we should be using whatever resources are available to gather real wealth and be responsible with those tools and not be ensnared by the banking cabal and not be, basically emboldened to, or indebted to, interest payments and just, living beyond your means, but using credit wisely is the key to acquiring capital assets that are real wealth. Unless you're a trust fund baby already and you just have millions of dollars in the bank that were given to you, the way to leverage actual competence is through entrepreneurship and effective use of the credit markets. And if there's all this free money going around for the people on their side, I mean, trust me, friend, you're not doing that. You're not, harming them at all by dropping out of the system. What is more threatening to them are the people who understand the system, who have mastered it, and are building an entirely separate and parallel system that will not be able to be controlled and have the seigniorage regime that we currently do. And money creation will be tied to actual entrepreneurship, if money is created at all. And, that's kind of what crypto and Bitcoin is reaching toward. And again, this is, the basic model handgun and rifle, and basically this industrial revolution on an informational scale. That is what blockchain is, and it's absolutely pinnacle to the world that is to come, regardless of, what the actual government structures look like. It's either we adopt their, Fed coin, or we develop our own system, and again, we operate that in parallel with the fiat regime until it reaches its final stages. And at that point, ideally, instead of George Soros being the billionaires and Michael Bloomberg, we have a lot of people on our side that actually have significant wealth generated. And we can actually respond to, these challenges to our sovereignty on a more cohesive level, and actually have whole, media agencies of our own. I think, in the event that Trump basically has this election stolen from him, I think that basically he should use the 4 years to create a media organization and then run again in 2024, and then basically have the entire new platform outside of the mainstream, the legacy media, and have that platform on which to do what he did prior, back when regular social media wasn't as heavily censored as it is now. He kind of broke the system. We all broke the system, and that's what the whole Trump phenomenon was about. And again, that phenomenon continues no matter what. That's part of this world, the world that is unfolding within the old world, right? The mitosis of worlds, as I've described. And so, we need our children to be psychically resonant. We need them to be clear. We can't be poisoning them with vaccines and aluminum hydroxide injected intramuscularly. I mean, again, the studies that you think, that not you guys, but if you're a new person around here, the studies that you might think exist to support vaccines, if you actually dive into the details, you see, again, they're testing a poison versus a poison, right? They're not testing against placebo, and thus basically they're artificially inflating the harms on the control side, and they're artificially decreasing the harms on the vaccine side or the drug side. And that is exactly what they're doing with many of the COVID vaccines today. And it's going to be, again, an entirely new type of a vaccine, an mRNA vaccine. It's not something that I would ever trust in my body or my children. I think, again, it's such a flawed modality when you understand that germ theory is not the only basis for infectious disease, and that we should be looking at the strength of the immune system of the body, the health of the lymph and the blood and the other organs of the body as far as nutrition. And basically that all of the actual components of health are being sustained on a natural level, and there's no amount of artificial shots or drugs that can make up for those deficiencies. The more we try to, is the more that we make warped meta-humans that are not really they're the free radicals within society. Again, even who knows about what's in a lot of the inks that people get tattooed with. it's not necessarily something that any sort of real science underpins. And, it's interesting, I'm not saying that, I have tattoos, and I'm not saying that, I feel like I've been poisoned as a result, but it's interesting just kind of people who are on kind of a very, intense vibration tend to have, a lot of tattoos, at least in certain quarters of America. But, again, it's important that we have the resources to educate our children and provide for their health and their well-being without being connected to the imperial program. It's important that you understand the foundations of health and biology for your own edification and your own enlightenment, rather than just trusting the experts, trusting the authority. They are not authorities, and they should not be trusted. They are basically just corporate suits, but they just have a different kind of suit. It's like a priest's robe, but it's just a white robe. And we are expected to believe these people no matter what they say, even when you look to the science to which they're gesturing and referring, and it's completely, it doesn't make any sense. There's no logic to it. It can actually be disproven, but it doesn't matter. We're supposed to don't mind the man behind the curtain, right? The London Imperial College model that predicted 2 million people were going to die from COVID in the United States, right? Complete bullshit. And there was no science to underpin it at all. Global warming is pseudoscience. It rests on a foundation of the conception of the world as a flat plane in which sunlight is evenly distributed. It does not take into account any of the nuance of the actual real climate cycle and the action of the sun. It is an absolute, crude crayon drawing picture of the climate system. And this is the foundation of all their supposed fancy models on which we're supposed to project the climate for the next 100 years, right? Let's look at a fundamentally chaotic system and let's project it forward 100 years, right? Because we're capable of doing that with our big computers and machines, right? It's a total joke. And logically and metaphysically and ultimately practically is a total joke. And it's the same thing with vaccines. If you learn a little bit about just how the body works and how the immune system works and the lymph, you will understand that vaccines are basically a very crude attempt to hijack a system that otherwise functions perfectly when it's encountering the actual pathogen. So strengthen the system, right, and prepare it to fight those battles. Don't artificially bring in the enemy covered in aluminum hydroxide and pretend like that's going to make the kingdom stronger, and to use, again, another metaphor. And anyway, that's my video today. I'll follow up later. Talk to you guys later. Peace.